Hi everyone, welcome back to Punk Paisley. This is Chris, and we're going to take a look today at an excellent compilation from 1986 out of Germany, the former West Germany, called Vaeterchen Frost, which translates as Little Father Frost. Why that name? I don't know 100%. If you look up what that means exactly, that would be this figure that is something like Father Christmas or Santa Claus that you find in Eastern European Slavic culture, something that's centered on New Year's Eve, and I think is a name that became popular in the communist era as a foil against the idea of Christmas, something and to be something more secular. Why the name for this compilation? Well, it could well be that the compiler thought of this as a gift of the sort that you might get during the holidays. Now, I picked this record up. It probably would have been in 1986, and it would have been at the Philadelphia, I know from the price tag, it was the Philadelphia Record Exchange, which at the time was located on just off of South Street, 5th and South. I was buying almost exclusively punk rock stuff at that point in my record collecting career. I would have picked this up not knowing any of these bands, or not knowing which is something that is something that you would have done at the time. You were taking total risks. You did not know what things sounded like. You went by names. Coded, if this band has this sort of name, they probably sound more or less like this idea that people had. You pick things by the graphics, the art, and the general presentation gave you a pretty good idea of what you were probably going to get. The record ended up sounding more or less exactly like I hoped it was going to, and I think is a really high quality compilation of a snapshot of what at least Europe sounded like in 1986 in punk and related alternative circles. Part of the reason I picked this album is because I'd like to shine a light on more obscure releases that I'm nearly 100% sure that nobody else is going to cover on YouTube. And partially because I think it's greatly representative of a lot of these efforts that were toiling in different regional scenes and people who were doing a lot of very small audience work and combining a lot of different subgenres of alternative music under one bigger umbrella. You generally get this impression that there was hardcore and those kids only generally listened to hardcore. It wasn't related to anything else, and that these scenes of alternative music were extremely split. You had a lot of people listening to a lot more stuff that was still underground, subcultural, tape trading. A very small percentage of young people were actually listening to this type of music and had to share spaces rather more than anything that you could imagine now. So without further ado, I'm going to go into my patented version of a record review, which is do a 1 through 10 rating of each track, tell you a little about them, and also then a 1 through 10 equally weighted total package rating 1 through 10 and see how that weighs in. We may need the readers for this because I took some notes, as I frequently do. The first track on here is by a band called Flesh Puppets. The song is called Tall Ships. I absolutely love this song. This sounds to me, it's got a little bit of a indie rock jangle to it. It's also somewhat dark. It has a little bit of goth going on, perhaps. And is the production and sound to me sounds like the best of early U2 or The Alarm, but also other influences as well. I gave the song a 10. I think it's fantastic. Of course, this is not the first time that I've given the lead track on an album a 10, which makes it appear that it's the best album that's ever been recorded by humans. And I was very disappointed to finally, all these years later, 40 years later nearly, I've looked up the Flesh Puppets in hopes of seeing if there's other work of theirs. I should have done this many years ago. And they only got out 2 singles. They were out of Manchester, England. Obviously somebody that was trading mail. And remember, there's no internet. This is something that I keep saying over and over again on these videos. This is prior to the World Wide Web. So for all intents and purposes, for most people, there is no internet. And then you're doing things by mail and you're doing things by tape trading and through ads and zines and that sort of thing. So this Manchester band is communicating with this fellow in Germany. We will get into a lot of the detail of who that is and who put this record out when we get to evaluating the album as a whole. They end up on this record when they only ever put out 4 songs on vinyl otherwise in their career, and this is one of them. It's Tall Ships. It's a fantastic song. It's an A-side, if that's meaningful at all, when you put out 2 singles that are indie singles. 3 other songs of theirs are available. You can track down those 2 singles on Discogs. Flesh Puppets are to be confused neither with Meat Puppets nor Flesh Tones. both of which are interesting bands to check out. I'm a bigger fan of Flesh Tones than Meat Puppets in general, but you know, another subject for a different day. We then get a German band called S-chords, who only ever put out 1 album. And they have a track on here called Müllkind. Now we're getting into some German language stuff that translates as Mill Child. It's a short song. I think it has a bit of a weak chorus. It's kind of sing-along punk. I gave it a 7. Ich bin das Müllkind is your chorus, and I wish that were a little catchier. Still not a horrible track. Mid to faster tempo punk track. Gave it a 7. It brings us up to an 8.5 for that Dusseldorf-based mod punk band is what Discogs calls them. I didn't hear a whole lot of mod on that track. Track number 3 is Hungry for What? Switzerland. So we've got four countries represented on this album. It's West Germany, because remember, this is 1986. It's before the wall fell. It's a different world. So the Bundesrepublik Deutschland is West Germany only. At that point, you've got a Swiss band, you've got an American band, and you've got a few British acts. The Swiss representatives on the record, and they released a track called At War, which is in English, and I have to say it's extremely similar to the S-chords track. The same tempo, there's very much the same guitar tone. They do have these whoa sort of epitaph type band, Bad Religion later vocals, but such similar production and tempo to the previous track that you could be, except for the slightly different vocal and the fact that we've switched from German to English, you could be forgiven for thinking that it was the same band. I also gave the track a 7, and that brings us to an 8 overall rating for the record, which is really quite strong. Track number 4 is from a German band called Clocks, and that is spelled C-L-O-X. Clocks formed way back in about 1977, and at this point they had their 4th album out. They called it a day after that. Apparently, I looked it up. They seem to have reformed at some point around 2010. I don't know if that's stuck or not. But Clocks were a veteran German punk band by that point, and their track on here sounds it. There's muscular production. It's a mid-tempo track. It really rocks. I think it's a really catchy, very good song. It's really one of the, when I picked the album up again and listened to it a couple times to do this video, it's definitely one of the tracks that I recall the most being on the record. I gave it a 9, and that brings us up to an 8.25 for the record. Track number 5 is from a group called Yeah Yeah No, who were from Britain, and they do a live version of a track. It's titled Prick Up Ya Ears. If you listen to the YouTube videos that are provided in a playlist on the Discogs page for this album, this is not the take of the song that's on the album. You're hearing a track that was taken from one of their 2 albums, both of which I'm very interested in now. But that track is much faster paced, more percussion. It's a rock song. It's a punkish rock song. The version that you get on this album also stuck in my mind. It is a drone. It sounds ceremonial. It sounded very dark. I thought that this was a very interesting thing to my mid-teenage years brain. Knowing that I knew that there was this darker music out there. I knew that there was this goth and industrial stuff and stuff that had a very dark edge to it. And this sounds more like that to me. The melody is retained, the melody of the lyric in the song, but it's very different than apparently what appeared on their LP. You're not going to hear this song unless you have this album. It doesn't appear to be that live recording doesn't appear to be on the internet. I find this memorable, different. I really liked it. It gives you a better idea as to how there was so much diversity in the live alternative music punk scene, even into 1986. It wasn't all fast hardcore. This was a band which unusually became slower playing the track live. Usually people are all amped up. And a lot of live recordings people play faster than the record. But this is exactly the opposite. Very interesting. Gave it an 8, and that brings us down to an 8.2 overall for the album, which is still very strong. The 6th track is Appliances-sfb, who were out of Madison, Wisconsin. They are the only American band on the album. They're a weird one. They're a strange band. They get described as new wave. I mean, they're certainly a rock band. I've heard tracks of theirs that are punkier. I've heard tracks of theirs that are just straight out new wavy, quirky. I've heard things that sound more like straight ahead indie rock from them. They released a few albums. I'm interested into looking into more from them. I knew a track of theirs from another compilation that I'd like to review, and that one was a little more on the punky side with some quirky vocal effects. This one definitely leans a little poppier. There's sort of a Western thing happening with it. I hear a little bit on this of what I heard from a monochrome set track on another compilation. They were a British band, and there are these woo-woo vocals, not the whoa-whoa, not your Epitaph, Bad Religion whoa-whoa, but this hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo, which is a little irritating. And even that didn't make it a terrible track. The song is called Cancer William. Strange stuff. I gave it a 6, which is the lowest, ties for the lowest rated track on the album. You know it's pretty good when the lowest rated track on the album I'm giving a 6. And that brings us down to a 7.83 for the overall rating for the album thus far. Track number 7 on the A-side is from Bum Bites, or Bum Beats. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word. Really, one guy. It was a British guy. His name here is Andy Burchell, and he was playing with synth, with sampling, with percussion. There are whispered and spoken vocals. It's the type of thing that you were getting more from tape trading. There was a tape trading culture. I'm going to, in fact, let me do it. I'm going to put up for you the blog, the long-running it's a decade now, I think, that it's been up. This long-running German blog called Tape Attack has so many free, when I say so many, thousands at this point of free downloads of that tape trading culture, some of which is punk, some of which is hardcore, but the majority of which are people sitting in their bedrooms doing very strange and sometimes frightening industrial sampling, electronic stuff, minimalist, down-tempo. The list can go on and on of all of the subgenres that we can list. Of the sort which was brothers in arms with outright obvious punk rock and hardcore. These are things that were often reviewed in the same zines, were into the mid-'80s under the big tent of punk rock in zine coverage. Things that you should definitely check out. I was curious about. I'm in my mid-teens in this period. I don't have a lot of money, and you don't know what things sound like. What things sound like exactly is a mystery, because you have no World Wide Web to reference unless you have friends who have a specific release who will play it for you, or you're tape trading with somebody, you're sending cassettes through the mail using stamps. You generally don't know exactly what things sound like. You have a pretty good idea from art, a pretty good idea from band names. You can read reviews in which people are describing, as I'm doing to you now, people are describing music with words, which has been famously described as like dancing about architecture. You did not know exactly what things were. So if you have $3 burning a hole in your pocket and you can buy a stamp and send the other $2. And it was that cheap. You could send $2 or $3 bills, physical dollar bills in the mail anywhere in the world. And weeks or months later, hopefully, usually, you would get back in the mail a cassette with somebody dubbed off of their master tape for you, probably the person who recorded the music. That was your shopping for music. You answered an ad in a zine, or you read a review in a zine that had the contact address for the person with information about how much their demo tape cost. So a lot of these people never got vinyl, never got to vinyl. They would have to meet somebody who was financing, putting together, tap them and say, hey, are you interested in this project? You know, send me the tapes and we'll put it on vinyl for you. And that's one of the cases here. So Bum Bites have this track, one guy again, have this track Consequence, which is not making vinyl otherwise. I liked it in general. It's the type of thing that I wouldn't have been spending, the whole point of that tangent that I just made, I probably wouldn't have been spending a lot of my own money to hear the entire cassette. If I have the $3, I'm probably going to send it to a punk band or a hardcore band or a hardcore compilation that somebody made that I'm almost guaranteed to like all of or most of, versus just rolling the dice on I have no idea what this sounds like, and you know, it might not be up my alley. So I'm glad it's on here. It's how I got to hear and be exposed to a lot of these different types of music, and I appreciate it more now than I did when I was 15. So it's cool that it's on here. I gave it a 6 only because I think it overstayed its welcome a little. You get the general musical and lyrical idea, and then the track is around a couple minutes longer than maybe it needed to be. And even that 6 just brings us down to a 7.57, which is still a rather strong album. We round off the album with XXX80, or, you know, XXX80. I forget how to pronounce the letter X in German. They have a song titled Gift. Now, the song's in German. An irony of the German and English is that the word gift in German, das Gift, means poison in English. So the song translates as poison. It's unlike Vaeterchen Frost distributing gifts of God knows what level. That would be some brilliant trolling. That is next level trolling if the record is titled after a gift giver, a mythical gift giver, because the word gift means poison in German. That would be next level. But this is a screaming straight ahead hardcore track. It's pretty simple. It is the least deviating from the norm hardcore track on the album. I give it a 7. It's a job well done. 7.5 for the album, and that's the end of side 1. We flip the record to side 2, and we get the first of a couple of tracks by what seems to be a very related and somewhat incestuous relationship, which you would not be surprised with a small press run, largely one country oriented compilation of this sort. And that is Family 5 or Family 5, who have a track that, and apparently that band is still going to this day, according to Discogs. They formed back around 1981, if I recall correctly, and they're still going to this day in some form or another, although they've slowed down considerably with the releases. I mean, these guys have to be 60 years old now. They're still doing it. Hats off. Family 5 or Family 5 have this track that is a hard rock pace. There's a shouted vocal. It's basic rock, little punky, didn't mind it. It has a very long, unpronounceable German title. And I gave it a 6. Not the best track on the album, still not horrible. That brings us down to 7 1/3 points overall rating. Next we have Dachsenband. There is no information for Dachsenband really on the internet. It's a strangely tempoed hardcore track with these sort of boing effects is the only way I can describe it. There are parts of what I'll call a guitar lead that have an effect on them that's sort of like a boing, 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 boing. And it's a little weird to start. It's a lot weird to start. And as the song goes on, you sort of see where they're going with that musically. It finds itself, I think, by the end of the track. I gave it a 7, which brings us down to a 7.3 rating for the album. Dachshundbahn, the writing credit on the back cover is credited to Martin Hoffman, who is also credited with writing another track on here with a different band, and is the guy running the label. So I think that may have been sort of a vanity project. There's virtually no information about Dachshundbahn online, and I assume that this is something that was generally not available unless you bought a demo tape directly from him. Next, track number 3 is Blank Bartoks. It turns out that Blank Bartoks, like Bela Bartok, the composer, were a one-off, probably 1984 project of the Family Fünf or Family Five guys. And the title of this track is The Lucky Day, Der Glückliche Tag. They claim on Discogs to have played one gig ever in Graz, Austria in 1984. That's how obscure we're getting here. It's a side project of a band that you probably already never heard of. Now there's an odd guitar effect on this as well. It's as if the guitar is phased rather than distorted, the sort of traditional scratchy guitar distortion way you may get in a lot of thrash. It's galloping hardcore punk. I gave it a 7. It's not the worst track. It brings us down to a 7.27 for the album as a whole. Track number 4, there's a bunch of 7s in a row here. Track number 4 is also a 7. Jung Analysts, which is Carl Jung reference, do a track called Spielen, which is to play in German. And this is actually one British guy in Ipswich named Terry Burrows, who probably did this at his almost certainly did this at his home recording studio. You've got some probably sampled rhythm. I don't know if it's a drum machine or sampled drums. You've got a ska beat at some point in the song that gets married to a deadpan vocal. The overall effect is very much like the Saturday Night Live skit from the 80s, Sprockets. Now's the time when Sprockets will be dance. It sounds very much like that. It's a British guy who did the track in German, making it even Sprocketsier. And then there's this also somewhat annoying, although a bit of an earworm, chorus, if we could call it that, with the word Spielen, where he sings, charitably using the word sing, Spielen. So that makes three tracks on this album where there's somebody doing high-pitched vocals as part of a track. You got Spielen, you've got a woo-woo track with the Appliances and a whoa-whoa track with Hungry for What. So, you know, there's some real vocal range diversity here, folks, as much as you're going to get. I mean, not everything in the 80s sounded like Minor Threat, let's put it that way. So that I gave a 7. I mean, it kind of grew on me. It's something I remember. It's an interesting rhythm. It's good. It was good for me as a mid-teen to be hearing these things that I wouldn't necessarily have I wouldn't necessarily voluntarily paid money for the entire demo tape, especially to wait for it to come from Britain, 8 weeks later. Cool that it's on here. Gave it a 7. That brings us down to a 7.25 overall rating for the album. Track number 5 is Katzenjammer Kids, which again sounds like a band. It's a guitar-based, somewhat punky instrumental that ends up even having some whistling at the end of it. The track is called Daisy Diesel, and it's another writing credit to Martin Hoffman. So how much of this was sort of a real band that played live and how much is, again, sort of a vanity or studio project, I'm not 100% sure, but it's fun. It reminds me kind of like a Shonen Knife track, of all things, to make a Japan reference. It reminds me a bit of a Shonen Knife type track if they wrote an up-tempo instrumental. I didn't mind it. I gave it a 7. That brings us down to a 7.23. In 6th position on the B-side, we have a band called Ranola with a track called Propellerschaden. Interesting. It's hard. I wrote that it's hardcore meets indie rock and that it's quirky. What else did I write? There's a plucky bass sound to it. You got a little bit of almost the slap funk bass, almost not quite. Interesting track, didn't mind it, gave it a 7, brings us down to a 7.21 rating for the album. Still a pretty good album. I mean, no track is rated below a 6 so far. In 7th position is one of the songs that I really remember from this album. 40 years later, it's a song that the lyric sticks in my head. A band called Deep Freeze Mice, who seem to have been very active in the tape trading and compilation world, have a live version of a track of theirs called Here Comes the Sun Exploding, which is rather political. It's extremely British in the sense of, you know, there was some holdover from the Canterbury folk, and this does not sound like a folk song, but the sort of Canterbury folk and the weirdness of groups like the Incredible String Band, British, English, eccentricity. That's the word I'm looking for, eccentricity. There's some of that here. There's individual personality. It is punk adjacent. It is certainly very punk in spirit. It is not an aggressive rock track, but it is a rock track. There's a little bit of keyboard on it. I love this song. I think it's really great. I gave it an 8, and you know, I like it. It's not going to be to everybody's taste, but I like it just fine. That brings us up to a 7.27 for the album. And then in the last position, Rimba, which was one guy named Robert Cox, British. He is a holdover, apparently, because he started recording and releasing his own music in 1971. He's doing electronic experimental music. There are tapes that he shows up on various compilations through the years, mostly Tape Trading World compilations. I've seen it, and I've seen entire tapes of his, I think including on Tape Attack, but you should definitely check out Rimba. Rimba. Let me try and get that right. The track is called Egg Foo Young. It is not punk rock. It is an experimental sort of soundscape, which normally I'm already like, no, please spare me that. No, you can't threaten me with that. But no, this is very interesting stuff. His tones here, it does sound a bit like an electronic marimba. I doubt that he was playing an actual marimba, but if he was, there had to be a massive amount of layered recording because one human cannot do what you're hearing on this track. It ends things nicely. It is mellow. It elicits some of the best of what you could hope for music in that it is, I find it to be simultaneously stimulating and soothing. It's like you took a very interesting drug. I just love that song. I mean, I gave it a 9. I think it's a great way to top out the album and a great way to get people hearing there are these alternative musics out there, and we are related and we should support each other and we could sample these, and why don't you write to the bands and find out more. And that brings us to the album package as a whole. This is one of probably the first 50 records that I ever bought in my life because I looked at this thing and this said indie. The black and white says indie. I see this punk rock, a young woman on the cover. She's got to be 60 years old now, pushing it. Wonder where she is. If anybody knows who this is, let us know. My first guess would be that this is Martin Hoffman's girlfriend, right? That's probably what you're figuring. Since he seems to be the mainspring behind the label, I'm guessing his Lord knows. Mystery. One of the mysteries of life. But I would love to find out eventually somehow. If anybody knows who this is, if you're her, leave it in the comments. Send me a message. We'll do an interview. We'll stick it on the channel. But yeah, this is on Mecca production, Mekka. It turns out this is one of, I think, 2 LPs. 2 12-inch records, maybe the only LP that Mecca ever put out. They put out a handful of mostly German mass-produced demo tapes, and you know, with photocopied inserts, a few 7-inch records, 1 12-inch EP, and this record. And this is the flagship right here for the label. 1986. I would have bought it. I'm almost certain that I would have bought this in 1986. It was maybe 10 of these made their way to the United States to select record stores, and I happened to walk into one of them, and that was very connected to the underground distribution world. Philadelphia Record Exchange, still love those guys. They relocated to Fishtown. God, it's 15 years ago now or so. Still love those guys. They were South Street. They were an anchor of South Street for many years. A lot of where I learned a lot about music was in that store and from buying things from that store. And they had such great things. They would have the bootlegs. They would have the small press run everything, small press run psych, small press run punk rock, hardcore. They would weird left field folk, whatever, they would have it. It was just a wonderful place to spend time and to spend really small amounts of money and pick up some wonderful records, and this was one of them. Yeah, picked it up because of the way, didn't know any of these bands, figured this is European, it's German punk rock. I had been taking German in high school. I could read some of this stuff, some things I needed to look up, some things I only looked up yesterday. Some of the crazier titles on here and some of the lyrics, but it's the whole package. I mean, this is reflective of getting of a community that was already communicating with each other, getting out music of theirs. You're getting out some live tracks you wouldn't hear otherwise. You're getting people on vinyl who would not have been on vinyl otherwise. You've got the booklet, so important in these punk rock compilations. You got the booklet where you've got your lyrics and artwork, and it gives you a better idea of what these bands are about. Tells you how to contact them. It has addresses to write to people, what they have out, cartoons, sense of humor. This is just wonderful. And there's even an offer in the back for a very limited print run, 50 copies of this particular release on the label from somebody who wasn't even on the compilation that Mecca was putting out. Just wonderful stuff. This is how culture happened and how communication happened in the pre-internet era. This is what you hope for, that sort of thing. I was buying this type of album because I love this type of culture, and I love the connections that you could have. And if you were really interested, you could follow up. This is really the whole idea of the compilation album, isn't it? It's a sampler, especially in the pre-internet era. I give the record, the X factor for the record, I give a 10, which brings us up to a 7.53 for the album. Good news and bad. Well, we'll go with the bad news first. Bad news and good news about hearing this. The bad news is, I don't know where you get a copy of this right now. I looked on Discogs, they are sold out. And they were selling, I guess, condition-based between about $25 US and about $70 US. There are no copies available right now. I looked on eBay, there are no copies listed on eBay right now. So you keep your eyes open for that. That's the bad news. The good news is somebody did take the time. It wasn't me, but some kind soul took the time to do a vinyl rip and put it on YouTube. So you can track this down and listen to the entire album on YouTube. You can listen to certain individual tracks. Some people also put in YouTube, but I would caution you that the versions of a couple of the British tracks, which would be the Deep Freeze Mice and the Yeah Yeah No tracks, are not the LP versions. They're not the studio recording versions. I think in the Deep Freeze Mice case, that seems to make less difference. It's not a radically different take. But the Yeah Yeah No version is markedly different. You will only hear that live droney version, which I found so compelling and still do nearly 40 years later, if you've got the album. Absolutely an awesome collector's package. I mean, now it's a collector's package. At the time, it was just a way to hear, it was a way to disseminate culture. The 7.53 doesn't sound that high, but until you try doing my system with one of your albums at home. So, there's a track I rated a 10, there's a couple of 9s, there's a couple of 8s, a lot of 7s and 2 6s, I think. It's a pretty strong record. That's a pretty strong compilation album, especially for stuff that is virtually impossible or extremely hard or expensive to find otherwise. If you wanted to hear these records, tapes, if you could find them, you would be spending well over $1,000 US easily in tracking down the records, the tapes, and their postage. So if you could find a copy of this, by all means find it. If not, my suggestion is to listen to it on YouTube. Some people, I understand, not me, perish the thought. I would never engage in such a thing. But my understanding is that some people download the audio from YouTube. Some people do that, I hear. And some people have the audacity to then go into like some sort of freeware Audacity, something like that, break the tracks into separate MP3s and then label them separately so you could listen to them at your. I'm not suggesting that you do this, mind you. That would be a crime against God and nature. So don't listen to anything that I say there. Disreputable people engage in. Perish the thought again. So this is Chris. It's Punk Paisley. We're trying to get those subscribers up. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be bringing you a ton of small pressing, really obscure music that came out in the 80s, the 90s, and beyond. Some of those are going to be contemporary, like this release, and some of them are going to be bootleg compilations that came out primarily in the 80s and 90s. And that are a big portion of my record collection stretching back 40 years now. So if you enjoy this content, you want to see more of it, I'd suggest that you subscribe and you like, and that'll certainly encourage me to keep doing this. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have comments by any means, please leave them in the comments. I read them and I respond. And until next time, kids, this is Chris from Punk Paisley reminding you to keep on rocking in the unfree world.